She just swallowed poison to save his life. The food taster's job is simple: eat first, die if necessary. For this woman, the if just became when. As the toxin hits her system, the crime boss she protects realizes his last line of defense is now his first casualty. Her role is an ancient one, a human shield against betrayal at the dinner table. For centuries, from Roman emperors to modern dictators, food tasters have been the final, sacrificial line between power and poison. But this system has a fatal flaw. What happens when the poison is slow and the taster's death sentence is the very signal that comes too late? The story begins in the shadow of empire. In ancient Rome, the position was called the praegustator, a slave whose sole purpose was to die first. Emperor Claudius employed one named Helotus. It didn't work. In the year 54, after a feast of mushrooms, Claudius fell ill. He called for his doctor, who allegedly finished the job with a poisoned feather down the emperor's throat. The taster was fine. The emperor was dead. This was the first catastrophic revelation. The system was broken from the start. Because poisons don't play by the rules of dinner etiquette, some toxins act in minutes, others in hours. A taster might feel perfectly fine as their master begins the main course, only for them both to collapse in agony long after the plates are cleared. The taster isn't a shield. They are a canary in a coal mine that doesn't sing until it's too late. Yet the practice persisted, evolving into a twisted symbol of power. By the Middle Ages, it was a formalized ritual. For King Henry VIII, paranoid about dynastic poison, it wasn't enough to have his own tasters. He ordered servants to consume the milk, bread, and meat of his young son, the future Edward VI, before the prince took a single bite. The message wasn't just about safety. It was a display: my line is so valuable, I will sacrifice your life without a second thought. But the golden age of the food taster was the Renaissance, in the sun-drenched, murderous courts of Italy. Here, poisoning was an art form. Families like the Borgias and the Medici turned dinner into a battlefield. To taste the cup of the Borgias became a synonym for a swift and certain death. A taster in this world faced a horrifying lottery. Was the wine laced with arsenic, causing a slow, painful death over days, or was it a faster, more merciful toxin like monkshood? Their job was to find out, using their own body as the test subject. This is where the psychology of the taster becomes as important as the poison. Who would take such a job? Often it was not a choice. Slaves, prisoners, the desperately poor, their lives were already forfeit to power. But sometimes it was a position of strange privilege. A trusted cupbearer in a Mughal court, tasting the emperor's wine, held his sovereign's life in his hands. That proximity to power was a kind of currency, even if the price was a daily dance with death. The fear they lived with was a precise, ticking clock. After consuming a sample, how long do you wait? 5 minutes? 30? An hour? Every second of wellness was a relief that curdled into fresh anxiety. Was the poison simply slow? Historical accounts suggest many royals didn't understand this lag. They expected a taster to gag and drop immediately. When that didn't happen, they assumed safety. This ignorance became the assassin's greatest weapon. Fast forward to the 20th century, to the heart of the Third Reich. Adolf Hitler, a man obsessed with purity and paranoid about plots, maintained a squad of food tasters at his Wolf's Lair headquarters. One of them was a young woman named Margit Werlk. Her routine was a study in dread. Each morning at 8, she and others would sample Hitler's bland vegetarian meals, the soups, the pastas. Then they would wait. 45 minutes of silent, terrifying anticipation. None of Hitler's tasters died from poison during her service. But Margit described the psychological toll decades later. The daily tears, the constant expectation of a pain that would announce her own end and presumably save the Führer. This is the stark reality. The food taster is less a practical safeguard and more a psychological placebo, a security theater performed with human lives. As one Cambridge chemist put it, the taster made the royal eater feel safer but didn't really protect them. Because no king or president will sit at a table for 2 hours watching their servant for symptoms. The food gets cold. The ritual becomes the point. So why does it persist into the modern era? Reports surround figures like Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who employ full-time food analysts and security details tasked with testing. It's a signal, a declaration that the leader is so important, so threatened, that an ancient human protocol must be revived. It projects control in a world of invisible threats. but it also creates a devastating vulnerability. It centralizes trust in one or a few anonymous individuals. What if the taster is part of the plot? Or what if, as in our opening scene, they become the tragic, early warning that no one can act upon in time? The stage is now set. We have an ancient practice built on a fundamental flaw, sustained by paranoia and pageantry. We have the tasters themselves, human alarms walking a razor's edge between privilege and sacrifice. And we have the slow, insidious poison, the one variable that renders the entire cruel contract void. This is the unstable equation, and history is littered with the moments when it exploded. One of the most chilling examples of this failure played out not in a dungeon, but in a gilded palace, between two of history's most famous lovers. It involves Cleopatra, Mark Antony, and a single cup of wine that exposed the terrifying truth about trust. In the year 31 BC, on the eve of the Battle of Actium, Mark Antony was a man besieged. He distrusted his ally and lover, Cleopatra, so he kept a food taster at hand at all times. According to the historian Pliny, Cleopatra, wishing to prove the futility of his suspicion, decided to demonstrate it in the most brutal way possible. At a banquet, she took a beautiful flower from her hair and dipped it into Antony's cup of wine. She then offered the now poisoned cup to his personal taster. The man drank. He died on the spot. The message was clear. If she wanted him dead, no taster in the world could stop her. The poison was so fast, so undetectable, that the human shield was nothing but a dramatic prop. Antony's fear was validated, but his solution was utterly useless. This incident reveals the second layer of the taster's dilemma. It's not just about the speed of the poison, it's about the psychology of the poisoner. A clever assassin doesn't attack the king. They attack the protocol. They use a toxin the taster cannot detect, or they corrupt the taster themselves. In the Ottoman Empire, there were whispers of tasters being bribed with promises of wealth for their families, sampling harmless portions while the fatal dose was served from a different dish. The system's greatest weakness was the humanity of the person at its center. But what is it like to be that person? To be the human alarm? We have a rare first-hand account from the 20th century. Margit Wölk was one of 15 young women conscripted to taste food for Adolf Hitler at his Wolf's Lair. She wasn't a loyalist. She was a Berliner hiding in the countryside, forced into the role. Every day was the same surreal horror. She'd be driven to a kitchen, presented with plates of the Führer's vegetarian fare, asparagus, rice, peppers. She had to take a full bite of everything, chew, swallow. Then the wait. 45 minutes of sitting in a room, waiting for cramps, for dizziness, for death. She described the silence as the loudest sound she'd ever heard. The worst part? The food was always bland, always boring. The banality of the meals juxtaposed with the monumental stakes of her own life. Margit survived. Hitler's food was never poisoned, but she lived with a different kind of poison, the guilt of having served the architect of the Holocaust and the lingering trauma of those 45-minute death watches. Her story tears away the medieval pageantry. This isn't about crowns and courtiers. It's about a scared young woman sitting on a hard chair, praying not to feel a twinge in her stomach. It reduces the grand historical protocol to its raw human core, a lottery ticket written on a digestive system. As methods of assassination evolved, so did the countermeasures. But in a cruel twist, the evolution of poison often outpaced the evolution of protection. The Renaissance saw the rise of inheritance powders like arsenic, which could be administered in small, cumulative doses that mimicked natural illness. A taster eating a single sample would ingest a non-lethal amount, but the king, eating the same dish day after day, would slowly accumulate a fatal dose. The taster, feeling fine each time, would unknowingly certify his own master's murder. The very ritual of tasting created a false sense of security that enabled a slower, more sinister plot. This arms race reached its peak with the rise of chemistry. By the 19th century, poisons like cyanide could be isolated and weaponized, acting in seconds, but so could their detection. The concept of the food taster began to morph. It was no longer just about a sacrificial body, it was about a scientific process. In some courts, tasters became early forensic analysts, using chemical tests on site. The human element started to merge with the technological. Yet for many leaders, the symbolic power of the human taster remained irresistible. The The sight of a loyal subject willingly risking their life was a performance of devotion that no laboratory test could replicate. And this performance could be manipulated into a weapon of its own. Consider the case of the Mauryan Empire in ancient India. Queen Durdhara, pregnant with the heir to the throne, was so devoted to her husband, Emperor Bindusara, that she insisted on tasting his food. According to chronicles, a rival faction poisoned a meal intended for the emperor. The queen ate first. She died, along with the unborn child. The taster's loyalty became the very conduit for a political coup. The assassin hadn't needed to breach the inner circle. They had relied on the predictable protocol of protection to achieve their goal. The most sacred act of service was turned inside out, becoming the engine of tragedy. This pattern repeats, the taster as a blind spot. The system assumes the taster is a neutral, trustworthy node, but they are a person with fears, loyalties, and price tags. In the paranoid court of Ivan the Terrible, tasters were often executed preemptively on mere suspicion of disloyalty, creating a horrifying paradox. The person hired to ensure the Tsar's safety had a life expectancy measured in weeks, not for what they did, but for what someone feared they might do. The role became a death sentence handed out twice, first by the job description and again by the employer's madness. So we arrive at the modern era with a conflicted legacy. The job is medically and technologically obsolete. We have mass spectrometers, toxin assays, sealed supply chains, and yet the figure persists. Why? Because the threat is not just about poison, it's about narrative. Having a food taster or a dedicated security team inspecting every morsel sends a powerful signal. It says, I am important enough to be killed. I am vigilant enough to stop it. It's a performance of power for both external enemies and internal constituencies. This brings us to the contemporary shadows where this ancient drama still plays out. To the private dining rooms of oligarchs, the sealed kitchens of certain presidential palaces, and the secluded compounds of organized crime syndicates. Here, the job description has updated, but the core contract remains medieval. The employer gets an illusion of control and a display of absolute authority. The employee gets a salary that tries to compensate for a risk that cannot be priced. And hovering over it all is the same ancient, unresolved flaw. What if the threat isn't in the food, but in the air? What if it's not a poison, but a bullet? The taster is a solution to a singular, archaic problem in a world now full of multifaceted, modern threats. Yet the recruitment continues, not from slave markets, but from desperate corners of the global economy. Bodyguards with culinary training, nurses with security clearances, people whose circumstances make a high-risk, high-reward contract seem like a lifeline. They are told they are part of an elite, ancient tradition. They are given protocols, waiting periods, medical kits. They are, in essence, handed a lottery ticket where the grand prize is survival and the alternative is being a headline. A headline like the one that opens our story, a woman in a simple black dress at a lavish table clutching her stomach. She is the end point of a 3,000-year-old line of work. And in that moment, as the toxin ignites in her veins, the entire fragile architecture of trust, ritual, and human sacrifice comes crashing down. But her story is just beginning, because her pain isn't the end of the plot, it's the trigger. Let's give her a name, let's call her Anya. She's 32, a former nurse from Lagos, recruited through a shadowy security agency that supplies domestic specialists to high-risk clients. Her contract paid 4 times what a hospital did. The fine print mentioned hazard mitigation. She understood. She was the hazard mitigation. Her employer is not a king or a president. He is a different kind of sovereign, Park Min-jun, the head of a Seoul-based criminal syndicate with interests in cyber fraud and pharmaceuticals. His enemies are numerous, rival gangs, defecting lieutenants, prosecutors. His dining room is his throne room, and every meal is a potential coup. Anya's job was to turn the ancient ritual into a modern security protocol. Sample every dish. Wait 20 minutes. Nod. It was clinical until it was. The night it happened was a family dinner. Min-jun's wife, his 2 teenage sons, his elderly mother visiting from Busan. Anya, in her simple black dress, stood to the side. The first course was a clear soup. She took a spoonful from the central tureen. It tasted of ginger and pine nuts. Normal, she waited. The family made small talk, 5 minutes, 10. She felt nothing. She gave the subtle, prearranged signal, a slight adjustment of her gold chain. The soup was served. The main course was grilled eel, a delicacy. Again, she sampled from the platter. Rich, smoky, slightly sweet. She returned to her station. This was the dangerous window. The soup had been cleared. If the poison was in the eel, its effects would now overlap with the soup's waiting period, confusing the timeline. At the 12-minute mark, a cramp, sharp and deep, lanced through her abdomen. It was not gas. It was a precise chemical knife. Here is the critical moment, the split-second calculus of a dying protocol. She could cry out, cause a panic, and potentially save the family if they hadn't eaten yet. But they had. They were already eating. Her pain was not a warning, it was a confirmation that came too late. So she did something else. She stayed silent. She locked her muscles, kept her face composed, and focused on memorizing every detail. The taste of the eel, the exact time. The look on the face of the new sous chef, hired just a week prior. She became a forensic recorder instead of a human alarm. As the pain intensified, burning up her esophagus, Min Jun noticed. He saw the sheen of sweat on her brow, the white-knuckle grip on the table edge. He rose, horror dawning. His family stared, frozen mid-bite. Anya met his eyes and gave a minute, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Do not eat. It was the last service she could perform. Then her legs buckled. Chaos, screams, phones, bodyguards storming in. But the poison was slow-acting arsenical compound, a signature of a particular offshoot of the Yakuza. It causes violent illness, but death can take days. This was intentional. It wasn't meant for a quick kill. It was meant to send a message. I can reach you at your family table. I can make you watch them suffer. Anya, the taster, was the message's first syllable. At the hospital, pumping her stomach, the questions began. From the police, who saw a potential gang war brewing, from Min Jun's own enforcers, who saw a catastrophic security failure, and from Min Jun himself. He came to her private room, a man whose entire worldview was built on control, now standing helpless before a woman he had hired to die. "Why didn't you scream?" he asked. Her answer, through cracked lips, redefined their entire relationship. Screaming wouldn't have saved you, it would only have told them their poison worked. Now they don't know what I know. What did she know? She knew the poison's unique, metallic aftertaste, which matched a case from her nursing days involving a contaminated herbal supplement. She knew the new sous chef had not reacted with shock, but with averted eyes, the look of a guilty man, not a surprised one. In her silence, she had bought time and preserved evidence. She had transformed from a passive shield into an active investigator. The taster was now the laid witness. This is where the modern story detonates the ancient one. Min Jun's response was not to discard the failed protocol. He weaponized it. He used Anya's poisoning as the pretext for a brutal internal purge. The sous chef was questioned. The security detail was replaced. But more importantly, Min Jun did something no medieval king could have conceived. He turned his taster into a counterintelligence asset. While Anya recovered, Min Jun's tech specialists created a deepfake. Using footage from the dining room's hidden cameras, they generated a video showing Anya sampling the eel, staggering, and then clearly pointing at an innocent rival within the organization before collapsing. The fake video was leaked. The result was chaos within the rival faction, paranoia, and a violent internal clash that weakened them significantly. Anya's real suffering was hidden. A digital phantom of her was used as a puppet to manipulate his enemies. The taster's body was no longer just a site of sacrifice, but a site of production for disinformation. But the plot, as they say, thickens. The hospital's toxicology report came back with an anomaly. The arsenic compound was there, yes, but so were traces of a rare, expensive antidote called dimercaprol. Someone had pre-treated Anya with a microdose of the antidote. This was the wait, it gets worse moment. The poisoning wasn't just an attack on Min Jun. It was a deliberately botched attack on her asterisk. Someone wanted her to get sick, but not die. Someone wanted to create the crisis, the purge, and the chaos that followed, all while ensuring the taster lived to see it. The possibilities were a hall of mirrors. A rival wanting to destabilize Min Jun. Within Min Jun's own circle wanting to clear out competitors using the poisoning as a catalyst. Or most chillingly, Min Jun himself. Had he orchestrated the poisoning of his own taster to create a pretext for the purge and the deepfake operation? Was Anya a pawn in his game, her suffering a calculated investment? Anya, recovering in a safe house, began to piece it together. The antidote had to be administered consistently in the days leading up to the event. It was in something she consumed daily. Her mind went to the small, elegant tin of herbal tea the agency had given her, a tonic for resilience. She had been poisoning herself prophylactically on behalf of a ghost. Her trust had been the real vector. The protocol had been corrupted from the inside, not by a bribed taster, but by a sabotaged taster. This revelation fractures the very foundation of the role. It's no longer about loyalty versus betrayal. It's about being a conscious weapon or an unconscious one. The taster is not just testing for poison, they are a calibrated instrument in a psychological operation. Their biological response, or their survival, is a data point in a larger scheme. The fallout was exponential. The rival Yakuza faction, crippled by the deepfake and the purge, launched a retaliatory cyber attack, draining millions from Min Jun's front companies. The police investigation, initially focused on attempted murder, now stumbled into the digital forgery and the financial warfare, broadening into a sprawling racketeering case. The story leaked to a scrappy financial crimes reporter. The headline was no longer Gangland Poisoning. It was Digital Ghosts and Chemical Lies, the new face of organized crime. Anya found herself at the center of a storm with multiple eyes. The police wanted her testimony. Min Jun wanted her silence. The shadowy agency that placed her wanted her extracted and disappeared. And the unseen hand that gave her the antidote-laced tea, they wanted something else, perhaps for her to finally see the whole board. In a safe house, watching the news cycle explode, she understood her grandmother's old saying in a new light. She had strong hands, but they weren't just for holding people up or for steadying a tasting spoon. They were for gripping the tiller of her own fate in a sea of manipulation. The poison had been a key. It unlocked the door to a world where she was not a tool, but a player, a dangerous, knowledgeable player. The ancient contract was void. She was no longer a pregestator waiting to die. She was a woman who had survived a calibrated murder and held in her mind the threads of a conspiracy that reached from a herbal tea tin to a gang war to a digital ghost story. The food was just the delivery system. The real toxin was information, and she was now immune. This is where the personal survival story collides with the institutional earthquake, setting the stage for a final, public reckoning. The safe house was a blank page. For the first time since the tasting spoon, Anya had a choice. The police offered witness protection, a new name, a quiet life far away. Min Jun, through an encrypted message, offered a promotion, head of his personal security, a seat at the table as a strategist, not a sampler. The agency, in a terse call, offered a one-way ticket to anywhere, no questions asked, if she simply vanished. But the choice wasn't between offers, it was between stories. Which narrative would she let define her life? The victim, the employee, the fugitive? She decided to write her own. She requested a meeting with the financial crimes reporter who had broken the digital forgery story. His name was Choi. She laid out her evidence, the timeline of her poisoning, the details of the antidote in the tea, the modus operandi of the agency that placed her. She didn't give him Min Jun's secrets or the rivals' names. She gave him the blueprint of the system itself. The modern food taster as a disposable, multi-purpose asset in a game of corporate and criminal warfare. Choi's resulting article, The Human Censor, How Poisoning in Gangnam Exposed a Global Security Racket, went viral. It wasn't about one gang. It was about an entire grey market industry that provided human testing services to oligarchs, corporations, and syndicates, using people from economically desperate regions as biological canaries. Article was the stone that started the avalanche. Interpol opened an inquiry into the agency. Legislators in the European Union began drafting regulations on high-risk personal service contracts. More importantly, it sparked a quiet internal revolt. Choi's inbox flooded with messages from other specialists, bodyguards, drivers, nurses, who had worked under similar contracts, sharing stories of undefined risks and moral compromises. Anya had given them a vocabulary. She had turned a personal crisis into a systemic expose. Meanwhile, the criminal case against Min Jun's organization, fueled by the digital forgery and the financial trail, intensified. Under pressure, Min Jun cut a deal. He provided evidence against the rival Yakuza faction in exchange for reduced charges for his own non-violent financial crimes. The rival faction was dismantled. But in a twist of poetic justice, The key piece of evidence he offered was the real, unedited security footage from the night of the poisoning, which clearly showed the sous chef's nervous demeanor. That footage led police to the chef, who, under interrogation, revealed he'd been coerced by a mid-level lieutenant in Min Jun's own organization. The plot had been an inside job from the start, orchestrated by that lieutenant to discredit Min Jun's head of security and seize power. The lieutenant had also arranged the antidote-laced tea, not out of mercy for Anya, but to ensure she survived as a credible witness to the attack, giving his coup attempt legitimacy. Min Jun had been betrayed by his own man. The taster had been a pawn in an internal power struggle. This was the final, clarifying revelation. The poison wasn't from an external enemy. It was the manifestation of the organization's own rot. The ancient fear of the outsider had been a decoy. The real threat sat at the second table. With the lieutenant arrested and the syndicate weakened, Min Jun stepped back from day-to-day operations. The public scandal and the internal betrayal had cost him too much. He dissolved the formal security detail that included tasters. In a final meeting with Anya, held in a public cafe under police observation, he was a diminished figure. "The old ways are dead," he said. "You killed them," she corrected him. "They were already dead. They just didn't know it." Anya did not take his job offer. She did not take the witness protection. Using a portion of the substantial hazard pay from her original contract, money she'd kept in a separate, untouched account, she partnered with Choi, the reporter, and a former UN investigator. Together, they founded a small, non-profit organization called the Pregestator Project. Its mission: to advocate for and provide legal resources to individuals working in high-risk, informal security roles globally. They lobby for international labor standards, run a verification service for security contracts, and maintain a confidential database of abusive employers and agencies. Anya's strength is no longer in her stomach's tolerance, but in her network's intelligence. The final, surprising detail comes from a lab test run a year later. Out of curiosity, Anya had a cutting from the antidote-laced tea tin analyzed by an independent forensic botanist. The report came back. The primary herb was indeed a carrier for the antidote dimercaprol, but mixed in was another, rarer compound, an extract from the Gloriosa superbar flower, a plant native to parts of Africa and Asia. In tiny doses, it can stimulate the nervous system. In traditional medicine in some West African cultures, it's sometimes called the rememberer's root, used in rituals to clarify thought and strengthen memory under duress. It had no medical bearing on the arsenic, but someone had put it there. Someone who knew that her real weapon wasn't her immunity, but her mind. Someone who wanted her to observe, to remember, to connect the dots. The identity of that someone, the person who truly prepared her tea, remains unknown. A ghost in the machine, who perhaps saw in Anya not a tool, but a potential ally in a larger, quieter war. Today, Anya's life bears no resemblance to the woman in the black dress. She travels on a legitimate passport, speaks at security conferences, and consults for ethical risk assessment firms. The scar from her stomach pump is a faint line. The memory of the cramp is a data point in a presentation. She turned the ultimate passive role, the one who waits to be poisoned, into one of active analysis. She didn't just survive the system, she reverse-engineered it and built a safer model in its place. In a quiet corner of Seoul, the lavish dining room where it happened has been sold. The new owners, a young tech family, renovated it. They tore out the long formal table and put in a large communal kitchen island. They cook together. They taste each other's food freely. There is no taster because there is no need for one. The room's history is buried under fresh paint and the smell of home-cooked meals. It is, in its way, the happiest possible ending for that space. The story of the food taster, from Claudius to Cleopatra to Hitler to a safe house in Seoul, reaches its logical conclusion here. It was never a sustainable form of protection. It was a ritual of power, a psychological crutch, and a profound vulnerability. In the end, its most enduring legacy is not the lives it saved, but the people it used up, and the rare few like Anya who used the experience to break the cycle. The contract is finished. The last Pregestator has left the table, not in a coffin, but on her own 2 feet, walking into a world where she decides what she consumes and what she becomes. So what are we left with, after 3,000 years of this strange profession? Not with stories of glory, but with a simple, uncomfortable question about the price of power. The Food Taster's Tale is not a history of safety achieved. It is a history of fear managed. From the Roman slave tasting mushrooms to the nervous young woman in Hitler's bunker, the role existed not because it worked, but because the powerful needed the theater of control. They needed to see a human being willingly stand in the path of the arrow aimed at them. It was a ritual that transformed abstract paranoia into a tangible, breathing person who could absorb the blow. But as Anya's story proves, the arrow is smarter now. The threats are slower, more insidious, or they bypass the plate entirely. The modern-day equivalents, the security teams, the chemical sniffers, the sealed supply chains, are just more sophisticated layers of the same theater. They announce that the person at the center is valuable enough to require a fortress. Yet every fortress has a gate, and every gate requires a guard. And every guard is a human being with a price, a fear, a memory. The lingering implication is this: any system of absolute protection that relies on absolute trust in other people is fundamentally fragile. The Food Taster is the ultimate symbol of that fragility. They are the point where infinite trust and infinite suspicion collide. We place our lives in their hands precisely because we believe someone wants to take it. We ask them to prove their loyalty by risking the very thing we cling to so desperately. Today, the title Food Taster might be obsolete, but the function has simply fragmented and gone digital. We have algorithm moderators absorbing psychological poison for a platform. We have cybersecurity analysts tasting millions of data packets for toxins of corruption. We have fact-checkers sampling the informational stew for lies. These are the new pregustators. Their health is mental, their poison is disinformation, and their waiting period is the slow erosion of reality. The dynamics are eerily familiar. A crucial, often undervalued human layer, standing between a powerful entity and a chaotic, threatening world. The story that began with a woman clutching her stomach in a Gangnam dining room ends not with an ending, but with a reflection. It asks us to look at the structures of power in our own lives, the systems, the companies, the governments, and to ask, who is tasting the food? Who is the human layer asked to absorb the first shock, to show the first sign of failure? And what happens to them when the toxin, finally, is detected? These are the stories that define not just history, but our present. They are the hidden contracts, the silent sacrifices, the quiet rebellions that reshape the world one dinner, one click, one decision at a time. If you found this descent into the shadows of power compelling, there are countless more hidden histories waiting to be uncovered. For deep dives into the forgotten roles that shaped our world, consider subscribing. Your curiosity fuels the search. Thanks for watching.